Today, we're jumping right into the absolute powerhouse that is the trillion-dollar US-China semiconductor conflict. We're going to start our journey in late August of 2023 with a single massive event that completely shocked Washington, D.C. and sent ripples all the way through the global tech community.
For years, there was this incredibly complex web of export controls designed to essentially starve China of advanced microchips. But then, boom, Chinese telecom giant Huawei drops a brand new smartphone, and inside it, a microscopic miracle. They called it the Kirin 9000S. It was an advanced 7-nanometer processor built entirely by China's top domestic foundry, SMIC, seemingly defying every single one of those brutal U.S. export controls. Observers everywhere started calling it a literal geopolitical nightmare for the West.
So on the surface, it really looked like US sanctions had completely failed, and that China had built a domestic chip ecosystem that completely bypassed the West. But today we'll break down why China's apparent success is actually a really grim war of attrition. We're going to look at 5 things: the illusion of victory, the hardware choke point, the software monopoly, the culture clash, and finally, the brutal math of time. All right, let's dive into area number 1, the illusion of victory, and the honestly crushing economics of building a 7-nanometer chip. Look, fabricating a single advanced chip in a perfectly controlled, pristine lab, that's just the baseline engineering challenge. Manufacturing millions of them sustainably, now that requires an economic miracle. Because China is legally barred from buying the absolute latest extreme ultraviolet or EUV technology, they rely on a desperate workaround using older DUV machines. Trying to draw a 7-nanometer circuit with an older DUV laser is physically like trying to paint the Mona Lisa with a thick, chunky paint roller. To force it to work, they use a technique called multi-patterning. They literally have to run the silicone through the machine up to 5 times just to try and perfect those layers. And the results of that multi-patterning workaround? It's pretty catastrophic. The yield rate, meaning the percentage of chips that actually work at the end of all this, is sitting somewhere between just 15 and 40%. That means up to 85% of the chips they make are literal waste, straight to the bin. Because of this, SMIC's chips cost up to 10 times the global market price. Any normal company would go bankrupt overnight facing numbers like that. But they survive, because they get a staggering $47.5 billion bailout from Beijing, literally just to absorb the massive losses. Which brings us to Section 2, the hardware choke point. Let's take a look inside the most complex machine in human history. If you want to print anything at 7 nanometers or below commercially, you absolutely need an EUV lithography scanner. And there is exactly one company on Earth that makes them, ASML in the Netherlands. Now, you might be wondering, why doesn't China just reverse engineer it? Well, because you can't just reverse engineer a global symphony. A single EUV system contains a mind-boggling 100,000 distinct parts. It weighs 180,000 kilograms. You literally need 40 freight containers and 3 separate cargo planes just to ship one of these machines to a customer. And the magic happening inside the vacuum chamber of this thing? It's almost hard to comprehend. To generate the exact 13.5 nanometer wavelength of light required to print atomic circuitry, a specialized generator shoots 50,000 microscopic droplets of molten tin every single second. Then, a colossal laser vaporizes those exact droplets into luminous plasma, 50,000 times a second, just to create the light. And it gets crazier. That EUV light then bounces off optical mirrors manufactured by Zeiss. These mirrors are so perfectly smooth that if you scaled one up to the size of the entire country of Germany, the biggest microscopic bump on its surface would measure just a fraction of a millimeter. You simply cannot recreate that level of intuitive quantum physics mastery in the dark. Okay, let's look at Section 3, the software monopoly, and why raw hardware specs actually mean absolutely nothing. Let's play devil's advocate. Let's pretend China pulls off a total miracle and secretly replicates ASML's hardware factories. They still face a second massive choke point. Way back in 2006, Nvidia released a free software platform called CUDA. It allowed developers to easily program graphics cards for general computing. Over 18 years, Nvidia entrenched CUDA into every university and startup globally. Today, almost every major AI framework speaks exactly one language: CUDA. They've built an entrenched ecosystem of over 5 million developers. And here's why that's a game changer. Raw hardware specs mean almost nothing in the AI era. Check this out. AMD built a phenomenal chip that, theoretically, has 32.1% more computing power than Nvidia's equivalent. But when tested in massive multi-GPU AI clusters, Nvidia's hyper-optimized CUDA system actually processes 46% more data per second. It fundamentally breaks the laws of hardware comparison. If a massive Western giant like AMD can't break the CUDA monopoly, asking global developers to abandon 18 years of code for a brand new Chinese architecture is practically impossible.
Moving right along to Section 4, the culture clash. How you can subsidize concrete, but not culture.
So while China is trapped by hardware and code, America is waking up to a terrifying realization of its own regarding the $52 billion CHIPS Act. You see, TSMC's absolute dominance isn't just about buying the best machines. It's deeply rooted in a highly aggressive labor culture. Manufacturing a 3-nanometer chip requires near perfection. If a $200 million machine goes offline, it bleeds millions of dollars per hour. As TSMC's founder, Morris Chang, so bluntly put it, if a machine breaks down at 1 a.m. in America, it will be fixed the next morning. In Taiwan, it will be fixed at 2 a.m.
And we saw this play out in real time. When TSMC tried to transplant this top-down culture to the Arizona desert, a grueling culture war erupted. On one side, you have American workers who expect a strict work-life balance and union boundaries. Totally normal, right? But on the other side, you have Taiwanese executives who are accustomed to an army of engineers with elite degrees that treat chip manufacturing with absolute military discipline, grinding out shifts and staying perpetually on call. Plus, America is learning the hard way that while you can absolutely subsidize concrete and build isolated factories, you cannot magically subsidize a hyper-dense ecosystem. Over in Taiwan, TSMC is surrounded by hundreds of specialized suppliers, all packed within a tight 50-mile radius. In Arizona, the factory sits completely isolated out in the sand. And for us, the consumers, this isolation means attempting to manufacture chips on U.S. soil remains incredibly slow and vastly more expensive. Finally, we reach Section 5, the brutal math of time and the unforgiving treadmill of Moore's law. This really gets to the ultimate tragedy of the chip war, the unrelenting physics of an industry that never, ever stops moving. Every single hour and every single dollar China spends desperately trying to build 2019 technology on outdated equipment is time they are not spending on the future. While China bleeds cash just to replicate 7-nanometer tech, the global leaders are vanishing over the horizon. TSMC is already mass-producing 3-nanometer chips today, and they're actively scaling to 2-nanometer chips by 2026. To make matters even worse, the West's technological horizon keeps violently expanding. ASML is rolling out new high-NA EUV systems that cost an insane $380 million apiece, capable of an 8-nanometer resolution in a single flash. Meanwhile, Nvidia is pushing its new Blackwell architecture, packing 28 billion transistors onto a platform that processes AI models up to 30 times faster than the chips China is currently banned from buying. The American strategy with these export controls was actually never to stop China permanently. They knew that was impossible. The real strategy was to freeze them in time in a multi-trillion-dollar game of catch-up, which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. In an industry totally governed by Moore's law, if you're spending all your resources trying to catch up to exactly where your rival was 5 years ago, have you already lost?